The morning sun filtered through the blinds as I sat at my kitchen table, sipping on lukewarm coffee. My new house, nestled in the suburbs of Riverview Pines, was supposed to be a haven, a place where I could start fresh. Little did I know it would soon become the battleground for a fight I never signed up for. It all began with a knock on my door. Standing on my porch was Karen, the head of our local homeowner association, a woman whose perfectly coiffed blonde hair and overzealous smile screamed authority. Behind her were two other members of the association, both holding clipboards and wearing matching smug expressions. "Good morning, Lucy," Karen chirped, her voice as sweet as overripe fruit. "I'm here to welcome you to the neighborhood and discuss a few housekeeping matters." I raised an eyebrow. "Housekeeping matters?" She handed me a thick stack of papers. "These are the homeowner association guidelines. You'll need to familiarize yourself with them and sign the acknowledgement at the back." Flipping through the pages, I saw a laundry list of restrictions. No exterior paint changes without approval, no lawn ornaments, no parking in the driveway overnight, and, my personal favorite, a $500 annual fee for community improvements. "I'll take a look," I replied curtly, already feeling my blood pressure rise. Karen's smile didn't waver. "Oh, and one more thing," she added, her tone dropping slightly. "We noticed your mailbox doesn't conform to the community standard. You'll need to replace it by the end of the week." I stared at her. "My mailbox?" "Yes, it's, shall we say, unique?" She gestured to the sturdy wooden post adorned with a small birdhouse on top, something I'd spent a weekend crafting. "We require uniformity in Riverview Pines. It's in the guidelines." My instinct was to argue, but I bit my tongue. "I'll consider it." Her smile widened. "Wonderful. Have a great day." As the trio marched off, I closed the door and leaned against it, the papers in my hand feeling heavier than they should. This was only the beginning. A few weeks later, the real trouble started. I had just returned from work when I noticed something odd. My power was out. Flicking the light switch confirmed it. No electricity. I grabbed my phone and dialed the utility company. "We're showing that your account is overdue," the representative informed me. "That's impossible. I set up autopay when I moved in." "I'm sorry, but the last payment was canceled by your bank." Confused and increasingly frustrated, I logged into my bank account. To my shock, several of my recent transactions were flagged as unauthorized and reversed. Among them were payments for my mortgage, utilities, and even a grocery store visit. My heart raced as I called the bank. "It appears there was a hold placed on your account due to suspicious activity," the banker explained. "What activity?" I demanded. "We received a report from the homeowner association claiming that your account was compromised and flagged for fraudulent transactions." "What? They have no authority to do that?" "You'll need to resolve this with them directly," he said, his tone detached. "Until then, we can't lift the hold." Seething, I marched over to Karen's house. Her pristine lawn and flower beds mocked me as I pounded on her door. She answered with her trademark smile, which quickly faded when she saw my expression. "Karen, did you report my bank account for fraud?" She blinked innocently. "Why, yes, we noticed some discrepancies in your payments. It's part of our duty to ensure financial stability in the community." "You had no right," my voice trembled with anger. "You canceled my transactions and left me without power or water. How is that legal?" Karen shrugged. "It's all in the guidelines. Perhaps you should read them more carefully." By the next morning, I was on the phone with an attorney. "This is a clear abuse of power," he said after I explained the situation. "We'll file an injunction to prevent further interference, and I recommend you start documenting everything." His advice couldn't have come sooner. That evening, I found my backyard in shambles. My fence was broken, my garden uprooted, and a pile of garbage dumped near the patio. A note pinned to the remnants of the fence read, "Conform or leave." I photographed the damage and called the police, but when they arrived, they were dismissive. "Looks like a neighborly dispute," the officer said with a shrug. "We'll file a report, but there's not much we can do without evidence." Frustration boiled inside me. It was clear Karen and the homeowner association were trying to bully me into submission, but I wasn't about to back down. Over the next few days, I installed security cameras and began researching similar cases. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. Karen had a history of overstepping her authority, often targeting new residents and forcing them out. The breaking point came when I received a certified letter. It declared that my property was being reclassified as community land, a designation that would allow the association to seize it for public use. The reasoning? My refusal to comply with their guidelines supposedly made me a disruptive influence. I stood on my porch, the letter trembling in my hands. Across the street, Karen watched me with a triumphant smirk, flanked by two other members of the homeowner association. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about me. It was about standing up to a system designed to crush anyone who dared to challenge it. Taking a deep breath, I turned and marched inside. It was time to fight back. The following morning, I sat at my dining table, my laptop open to a blank document. A steaming cup of coffee sat forgotten next to me as I stared at the words at the top of the page. Evidence log. I needed to be meticulous. If Karen and the homeowner association wanted a war, I was going to fight back with everything I had. The first thing I did was compile all the photographs I had taken of the damage to my property. Each image told a story. The broken fence, the uprooted plants, and the pile of garbage dumped maliciously in my backyard. I included copies of the threatening note and the certified letter that declared my property as community land. It felt surreal documenting what amounted to a coordinated attack on my life. My attorney, Daniel Carter, called me that afternoon. His voice was calm but firm. Lucy, I've filed a preliminary injunction to halt any actions the homeowner association might take against your property. We'll need to present evidence at the hearing, so keep everything organized. I'm on it, I replied. But what about the damage they've already caused? And the utilities? One thing at a time, he said. I've reached out to the utility company and the bank. It'll take a few days to untangle the mess they've created. In the meantime, don't let your guard down. His words felt like both a warning and a challenge. Karen wasn't going to back off easily. That evening, as I reviewed my growing file of evidence, I heard a sharp knock at the door. My heart sank. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but then I grabbed my phone and hit record before opening the door. Karen stood there, flanked by two men I recognized as contractors who often worked on community projects. Her smile was sharper than ever. Good evening, Lucy. I'm here to discuss a resolution to our ongoing disagreements. I crossed my arms, phone still recording at my side. What do you want, Karen? I've spoken with the board, and we've decided to offer you a settlement. If you agree to vacate your property within 30 days, the homeowner association will compensate you with $10,000. That's more than generous, considering your non-compliance with our guidelines. My jaw dropped. You're trying to bribe me to leave my own home? Karen's smile faltered. It's not a bribe, Lucy. It's an opportunity to resolve this amicably. No, I said firmly. You're not going to intimidate or buy me out. This is my home, and I'm not leaving. Her expression darkened. Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. As she turned to leave, one of the contractors smirked at me. You should take the deal, lady. Things could get complicated if you don't. I slammed the door and locked it, my hands shaking with anger. This was no longer just about property. It was about principle. Karen and her cronies had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next day, I installed additional security cameras around my property, including one facing the street. That decision proved crucial. Late that night, I was woken by the sound of metal scraping against metal. I rushed to the window and saw a shadowy figure tampering with my fence. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. Someone's on my property trying to break in. By the time the officers arrived, the figure was gone, but my new camera had captured everything. The footage showed one of the contractors from earlier cutting through the fence with bolt cutters. The officers took my statement and reviewed the video. We'll look into it, one of them said, but his tone was indifferent, as if this was just another petty neighborhood dispute. A few days later, I received a notice in the mail from the homeowner association. It claimed I was in violation of multiple guidelines, including failure to maintain property standards and unapproved modifications. Attached was an invoice for $3,000 in fines. I stormed into Daniel's office, the notice crumpled in my hand. This is retaliation. They're trying to bleed me dry. He nodded, his expression grim. This is a common tactic. They're trying to overwhelm you with legal and financial pressure. But don't worry, we'll counter this in court. His confidence was reassuring, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was always one step ahead. The final straw came when I returned home one evening to find my driveway blocked by a construction crew. A large sign announced that the homeowner association had approved the installation of a new drainage system, right through my front yard. I confronted the foreman, but he shrugged. "Take it up with Karen," he said. "We're just following orders." Furious, I called Daniel again. "They're tearing up my property now. How is this legal?" "It's not," he replied. "I'll file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow. For now, document everything." I spent the night photographing the construction site, the heavy machinery parked on my lawn, and the torn-up earth where my garden used to be. It felt like a nightmare with no end in sight. The next morning, I awoke to a pounding on the door. A police officer stood on my porch, holding a warrant. "Ma'am, we've received complaints from the homeowner association. They're alleging harassment and disorderly conduct." My stomach dropped. "What? That's absurd. I'm the one being harassed." "You'll need to come with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. As I was escorted to the patrol car, Karen stood across the street, her arms crossed and a satisfied smile on her face. It was clear she'd orchestrated this. But I wasn't going to let her win. This fight was far from over. Sitting in the small holding cell at the local police station, I felt an overwhelming mix of frustration, fear, and determination. The walls seemed to close in on me as I replayed the events that had led to this moment. Karen had orchestrated this arrest, using her influence within the homeowner association and, apparently, with the local authorities. But I wasn't going to let her win. This was far from over. After what felt like hours, Daniel arrived. His presence was a relief, though his expression was serious. "Lucy, they're charging you with disorderly conduct and harassment," he said. "We'll get you out on bail, but we need to approach this carefully." "This is ridiculous," I snapped. "I haven't done anything wrong. They're the ones harassing me." "I know," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm, "and we'll prove that. For now, keep your head down and don't engage with Karen or anyone from the homeowner association until we have this sorted." Once I was released, I returned home to find another unpleasant surprise waiting for me. A notice had been taped to my door, informing me that I was being fined an additional $2,000 for unauthorized modifications to my property. According to the letter, the security cameras I had installed were not approved by the homeowner association. I tore the notice off the door and stormed inside. My phone buzzed with a notification from one of the cameras. Checking the feed, I saw Karen and two other board members walking away from my property, smug smiles plastered on their faces. "That's it," I muttered to myself. I began drafting a formal complaint to the local government, outlining every instance of harassment, sabotage, and overreach by the homeowner association. I included copies of the fines, photographs of the damage, and a detailed account of my wrongful arrest. The next day, Daniel and I met with a local journalist named Claire Dawson. She had covered several stories about corruption in small-town politics and was eager to take on my case. "This is exactly the kind of abuse of power people need to know about," she said, flipping through the stack of documents I'd brought. "Karen has been running the homeowner association like her personal fiefdom," I explained. "She's using her position to bully residents, extort money, and now she's trying to force me out of my own home." Claire nodded. "We'll start with an article highlighting your story. And if this escalates, we can look into a full investigative piece." The article was published a week later, and it didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Neighbors I'd never spoken to started reaching out, sharing their own experiences with Karen and the homeowner association. One woman, an elderly widow named Mrs. Cartwright, revealed that she'd been fined thousands of dollars for violations, like having a garden gnome in her yard and using non-standard blinds in her windows. "She's been targeting people who can't fight back," Mrs. Cartwright said, her voice trembling with anger. "It's about time someone stood up to her." Encouraged by the growing support, I decided to hold a community meeting at my house. The goal was to unite the residents against Karen and her cronies. If enough people spoke out, we could challenge her authority and potentially dissolve the current homeowner association board. The night of the meeting, my living room was packed. People sat on couches, leaned against walls, and stood in the doorway, all sharing their stories. There was a common thread: Karen's pattern of intimidation, financial exploitation, and favoritism. "She fined me for having a grill in my backyard," one man said. "But her friend down the street has a full outdoor kitchen, and she didn't say a word. She threatened to tow my car because it was parked on the street overnight," another woman added. "But her son's truck is always parked there." The stories kept coming, and with each one, the anger in the room grew. By the end of the night, we'd formed a coalition. Daniel helped us draft a petition to call for a vote to remove Karen and the other board members. We also planned to file a class action lawsuit against the Homeowner Association for abuse of power and damages. Karen didn't take the news well. The next morning, I woke up to find my car vandalized. The tires were slashed and someone had spray painted the word liar across the hood. I reported it to the police, but their response was predictably lackluster. "We'll file a report," the officer said, his tone dismissive. Thankfully, my security cameras had captured everything. The footage clearly showed Karen's son and one of the contractors sneaking onto my driveway in the middle of the night. This time, I didn't bother with the local police. I took the evidence straight to the county sheriff's office. As the petition gained traction, Karen and the board ramped up their efforts to intimidate us. Letters threatening legal action were sent to anyone who signed, and rumors began circulating that I was a troublemaker and financially unstable. Claire published a follow-up article exposing these tactics, which only fueled public outrage. The tension reached its peak when Karen called an emergency homeowner association meeting, claiming it was to address the baseless accusations against her. It was a spectacle. Karen stood at the podium, flanked by her loyal board members, and launched into a tirade about how she'd only ever acted in the best interests of the community. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly presented the evidence. Photographs, emails, and video footage that painted a very different picture. The room erupted in whispers and gasps as I laid bare the extent of Karen's corruption. "This isn't about community standards," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It's about control. Karen and her board have abused their power for too long, and it's time we take it back." By the end of the meeting, the petition had more than enough signatures to trigger a vote. Karen's face was pale as she realized the tide had turned. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. The air in the community center was electric as residents filed in for the vote. Rows of folding chairs were quickly filled, and latecomers stood along the walls. The tension was palpable. This was the moment that would decide Karen's fate as head of the Homeowner Association. I stood near the back, clutching a folder of documents that had become my shield and my weapon. Karen sat at the front, flanked by her loyal board members. Her confident demeanor had cracked, and I could see her glancing nervously at the growing crowd. The petition had garnered overwhelming support, and it was clear that she was losing control of the narrative. The meeting began with the board's lawyer reading a prepared statement, arguing that the accusations against Karen were baseless and inflammatory. Karen herself took the podium, her voice wavering as she tried to defend her actions. "Everything I've done has been for the betterment of this community," she said, her gaze darting around the room. "These accusations are nothing more than the work of a disgruntled resident who refuses to follow the rules." That was my cue. I stood up, holding a stack of evidence. "If following the rules means tolerating abuse of power and harassment, then yes, I'm guilty," I said, my voice steady. "But the truth is, this is not about me. This is about Karen and her misuse of authority." I handed copies of the evidence to the board and began my presentation. Using a projector, I displayed photographs of the vandalism, videos of the threats, and records of the excessive fines and fees levied by Karen's administration. The room was silent except for the occasional murmur of disbelief. As I wrapped up, a man in the front row stood. "I've lived here for 15 years, he said, "and in all that time, I've never seen the Homeowner Association act in the interests of anyone but themselves. It's time for a change." Others began to speak up, sharing their own experiences. The elderly widow who had been fined for her garden gnome, the single mother threatened with foreclosure over a minor infraction, the couple whose driveway had been blocked for weeks during a community project. Their stories painted a damning picture of Karen's reign. The vote was conducted by secret ballot. As the votes were tallied, the room buzzed with anticipation. Karen sat stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap, her confident facade completely gone. When the results were announced, the room erupted in cheers. Karen and her board had been overwhelmingly voted out. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The new board, formed by residents who had opposed Karen, wasted no time in implementing changes. They suspended all pending fines and fees, launched an investigation into the Homeowner Association's finances, and began revising the community guidelines to ensure fairness and transparency. Meanwhile, my lawsuit against Karen and the former board members moved forward. The evidence I had gathered, combined with testimony from other residents, painted a clear picture of their corruption and abuse. Karen's attempts to delay the proceedings only made her look guiltier, and eventually she was forced to settle out of court. On the day the settlement was finalized, I stood on my porch, looking out at the quiet street. The nightmare that had consumed my life for months was finally over. My neighbors, once strangers, had become allies and friends. Together, we had stood up to a bully and reclaimed our community. As I stepped back inside, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Congratulations," it read. "You did it." I smiled, knowing that this victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had the courage to stand up and say, "Enough is enough."